Hi dear audience and the students, hope you would be fine. Today in this video we would be discussing the difference between structuralism and post-structuralism. Actually these movements, structuralism and post-structuralism and then deconstruction, are very much interlinked with one another, but still there are some differences between these movements as well. So students remain confused about the major differences between the structuralism and the post-structuralism movements. So there are four major points are the underlying cutting differences. One is that of the origin of these two movements, structuralism and the post-structuralism, and then there is a difference of the tone and the style, and then third is of the attitude to language, and then is the difference of the project. Now we would be discussing one by one what is origin, what is the tone and style, what is the attitude to language and the project. So first of all, if we talk about the origin of structuralism, structuralism is more based on the theory of linguistics. We take the linguistics as the scientific study of language. From here, we means that the structuralists take the language as objective, very disciplined, and more organized, more scientific. So, linguistics is a discipline which always has been inherently confident about the possibility of establishing the objective truth. When we talk that linguistics is the scientific in its nature, so we are establishing, we are confirming that it is objective, it's not the subjective. So, structuralism believes that if we observe accurately and we collect the data systematically and make logical deductions, then we can reach under reliable conclusions about the language and the word. This is the stance of the structuralist. Moreover, structuralism inherits that it is more as the language is scientific, so the meanings are more scientific, so meanings can be objective and they can be universalized as well. So it believes that it is more a system, a method, and there is a reason of establishing the reliable truths. So structuralist takes the meanings and the truth as reliable, scientific, objective, scientific. While post-structuralism as a movement is more based on the philosophy, and philosophy is such a discipline which is more skeptical to the things. It's not objective like structuralism, it's not objective like as the structuralists that take the language. Philosophy basically questions everything. So if we talk about the Nietzsche's famous remarks that there are no facts, only interpretations. So this is the true heart of the philosophy. Means people take from the philosophical point, they take the things not as the facts but interpretations, and interpretations are relative and they keep on changing from reference to reference. So post-structuralism is more based on the philosophy, and philosophy is more skeptical in nature. So there is the major difference of origin of the structuralism and the post-structuralism. Structuralism is a theory based on the language, and post-structuralism is the theory based on the philosophy. So there is the major difference between these two. Post-structuralism inherits its habit of skepticism and intensifies, and it may ask a lot of questions. Philosophy basically questions everything, while language is more discrete, more scientific, more coherent, more reliable. So this is the first major difference of the origin between structuralism and the post-structuralism. And then there is a difference of the tone and the style. Structuralist writing tend towards the abstraction and generalization. For example, as structuralists are of the view that meaning are not inherent in the text, but we can generalize those meanings to other things. So as you know, language, the teaching of language moves from known to unknown and from easy to difficult one. So same is the approach and the tone of the structuralism. They thinks that we can move from the known things to the abstractions, and from particulars to generalization. So this is the guide of the structuralism. They move from known to abstract, and the existent concrete to the abstractions, and then focus to the generalization of the meanings as well. So it aims from a detached scientific coolness of the tone, given its derivation from the linguistic science, and this is what we could expect. For example, Ronald Barthes' essays, they are introduction to the structural analysis of the narrative. So they think that there is the scientific coolness, means science is more cool. Though meanings are not inherent in the text, but they can be generalized to the other. For example, one theory I may enable you to understand like this, that for example, there is the particular meaning of a word, but we can generalize that word or that meanings to other things. So this is called a scientific coolness. So it is in that represented in the image, music, text, is a typical of this tone and the treatment with the discrete steps in orderly proposition, exposition, complete with the diagrams. The style is neutral and anonymous. It is a typical of the scientific writings. While post-structuralists, in contrast, they think that language is not more abstract. It's not more generalization. It cannot be generalized to everything, but post-structuralist thinks that language is more a medium of communicating emotions as well. So the tone is urgent, euphoristic, and the style is flamboyant and self-consciously showy. Titles may be contain the puns and allusions. For example, if we talk about this, structuralist takes that language in a very organized manner, in a very abstract to the point concepts, with the exception of generalization, while post-structuralist thinks that language might not be. For example, pun have their different meanings. For example, if I say you are my son, so this son may be, I might be referring to the son. Son means that my beta as well, and then the sun to Mars, my solar system as well. So these are the central lines of argument, which are based on the pun and the play of word of the play. Often deconstruction writing fix on the some material aspects of the language, such as the metaphor used by the writers and the epistemology of a word. For example, post-structuralism takes more into account the meaning of the literary devices as well, and it might be the intonation pattern of the speaker as well. For example, irony is there, simile is there, metaphor is there. So metaphorical language is possible from the perspective of the post-structuralist, while structuralist takes the language in its simple and scientific tone towards, they adopt the simple tone towards the language, while post-structuralist makes the very figurative tone towards the language. The third is that of the attitude to language. The structuralists accept that the word is constructed through language, and in this sense we do not have access to the reality other than through the linguistics medium. This is the perspective of the structuralist. And all the same, it decides that to live with the facts and continue to use the language to think and perceive it. After all, language is an orderly system. This is the understanding of the structuralist, that it is the orderly system and it's not the chaotic. It is the language which brings the meanings, order, and system to the life. So realizing our dependence upon it means on the language, we need to induce intellectual despairs. Means all our intellectual is coming from the language, and if there had been no language, there would have been no reality, there would have been no civilization, there would have been nothing. This is basically the stance of the structuralist, while post-structuralist thinks that though language is important, but it's not the very fundamentalist. There are, for example, other things of reality as well. So they take that structuralism is more fundamental in insisting upon the consequences of the view that, in effect, reality itself is the textual. Post-structuralists develop what threatens to become the terminal anxieties about the possibility of achieving any knowledge through language. So this is a, for example, if language is the only way of communicating knowledge, so and the language is slippery as well. So how we be relying upon the unification of the truth, and how we would be, when language itself is not, for example, you might have heard about that concept of the sign signifier and the signified, means that there is no direct relationship between the concept and the language which we use for that, for the communication of that language. Then how we would be able to reach on the reality? This is the stance of the post-structuralist. So the verbal sign in its view is constantly floating free of the concept it is proposed to the designate. Thus the post-structuralist view of speaking about the language involves a rather obsessive imagery based on the liquids. Liquids means the signs are liquid, language is liquid, all that on the mediums of truth are very liquid, and they keep on changing, and that word, the word slippage has been used for the meanings. So signs float free of what they designate, means signs have no direct connection with those of the meanings and the concepts. So they always remain, meanings are fluid and the subject to slippage as well. The linguistic fluid sloppage about the swelling over unpredictably defies our attempts to carry significations carefully from the giver to the receiver, means what the language gives to its audience, what the meanings are intended by the speaker, and what the meanings are perceived from the receiver, there might be the difference. So there is the possibility of the fluidity. So a post-structuralist thinks that from the perspective of language and the meanings, language is not reliable, so the truth is not reliable. So this is the difference of attitude from the perspective of structuralist and the post-structuralist. Similarly, a post-structuralist considers that meanings words can never be granted and 100% pure as well. Thus, the words are always contaminated. Contaminated means they might be having some opposites. They might not be having some meaning, intended meaning, what the author is saying. So when meaning and truth reach to the receiver, there might be some contamination. So they always speak of this anxiety, linguistic anxiety. Post-structuralists call it as the linguistic anxiety, that language is not reliable, so we cannot rely on the language for the truth. Then there is a difference of project. Means structuralists thinks that they ask that we can question everything, but still there is some general categorization, there are some general structures, we cannot move beyond those perception, categorization, and the questions and the structures. So structuralist considers that we can question those traditional categorization of the meanings, but still we are bound to rely on those structures and categorization of the meanings. Structuralists more consider that language meanings come through the binaries. For example, a day is dependent upon the binary of the night. Good is dependent upon the binary of evil. So good and evil, though they are two different ones, and the meaning of good is coming from the evil, and the meaning of day is night coming from the night, means the other gives the meanings. For example, the west, if it is the center, and east is its other, so it's the other, means it is the east who is giving the meaning to the west. But these two binaries, for example, east and west, good and bad, day and night, though they are different though they can be questioned, but still we have to rely on these two binaries. We cannot move beyond these binaries. This is the understanding of structuralism, while post-structuralist thinks that it's more fundamental. It distrusts the notion of reasons. I mean, when there is not a particular reason, then how we can rely on those binaries? The idea of human being as an independent entity, preferring the notion of the dissolved, the constructed subjects, means the reality always keeps on changing and constructed one, so it's relative as well. So how we can those rely on those binaries, whereby we may think of it as the individual is really a product of social and the linguistics forces. If we take the structuralism, the stance of structuralism, they takes the human as the product of linguistics forces, while post-structuralist takes the human as a product of social and linguistic forces, so they are more broadening than the structuralist. So that is not an essence as merely as the tissue of textualities. Thus the torch of skepticism is the ability or the tendency to ask the questions. So the Western intelligentsia or the civilization that is based on the ability to question everything, and this means the sense of questioning has brought the West as to the ideal power or the advancement, development, and all this. So if we going to before reach to the conclusion, we make by these differences can establish this, that structuralism is more scientific, more organized, more objective, more systematic, more mathematical, and more constructive, conservative, restrictive one as well. While post-structuralism is more based on the philosophy, it's more give liberalism, give more space to the different meanings and interpretations. It takes the life more as extended one rather than the restrictive one, and it's more liberal, more create the space for the individuals, for the questions and all that. So by this difference we may say that structuralism is more limited and post-structuralism is more extended one, and it has more space in its scope and the meaning. With this, goodbye. Thank you very much.